Welcome back to the 1867 Sports Show, episode number Jakob Hurdle tonight.
Oh boy, we're going to get into it tonight.
Well, we're going to get into it tonight. Mr. Skinner, what's going on, my friend?
Well, lots happening in the world of sports because you and I had a whole rundown queued up for, all right, these are the things we're going to talk about tonight. Then the weekend happened and it was like, well, why do we bother, even trying to put these things together ahead of time? Because just headline after people moving up and down in the draft. It's, yeah, a bit of a topsy-turvy last couple of days in the world of sports.
I mean, we do it to ourselves because we try to be prepared and kind of collaborate on what we're going to talk about a week in advance. And every week, like we were just talking about before we signed on, we you just got to scrap it and just go with what just broke out. So let's just going forward, we'll collaborate on Tuesday mornings and say, hey, what did you like over the last week that we didn't talk about last week? Cool. Let's talk about it this week. But yeah, you're absolutely right. There's been a lot of, pretty significant moments in the landscape of Canadian sport that have dropped in the last week. So, I mean, let's kind of get right into it. I obviously dropped Jakob Poeltl, number 19, because obviously we're episode number 19. He wears number 19 for the Toronto Raptors. I'm wearing the jersey. I don't know if people can see it, but I'm like, oh, I'm going to wear my Raptors jersey tonight. You can't even see the logo. But
the shoulder straps are a nice touch, though.
This is actually a Terrence Ross jersey. I don't know if you remember Terrence Ross back in the heyday of the mid 2010s, but yeah, well, T. Ross was one of my favorite players to watch until he decided he was going to shoot 75 threes a game and never dunk again.
Yeah.
But
talk about a fan not imitating the body type of the individual he's cheering for, because I think he was maybe 150 pounds soaking wet most nights. Like,
yeah, it's if I was going to wear a jersey that was more fitting to my body style, it would have to be Marc Gasol. I think he's the only one that would actually be somewhat close. So
I'm going to start going there and buy a Lane Johnson jersey next there for my Eagles.
What's funny? That Lane Johnson wears the same number that I wore, 65. He wears the same type of swag that I used to wear with the half sleeves, and kind of wears the tinted visor sometimes, which I used to wear as well. So
he's just your How I Met Your Mother doppelganger, then, isn't he?
Yeah, big fan of big fan of Lane Johnson. He even has the bald head with the beard. It's a good look.
There you go.
But, anyways, we're getting off track already. Back to Mr. Jakob Poeltl. So anyone who was following the NBA this past weekend, the NBA draft lottery dropped on Sunday, and to a lot of people's chagrin, the Toronto Raptors did not win said draft lottery. In fact, they dropped down a couple of spaces, which meant that their top 6 pick from the Jakob Poeltl trade from San Antonio last year was actually going to come to fruition this year. So the number 8 selection, which was the Toronto Raptors pick, is now part of the San Antonio Spurs rebuild around Victor Wembanyama. So again, initial thoughts on the landscape of where the Toronto Raptors pick now, where the Toronto Raptors picks now land, which is number 19 and 31. So they made these trades. They shipped off some of their savvy veterans for the future, but the future obviously is not going to be this year. It's moved down the line, kicked the can down the road till 2025.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the doomsday scenario for Raptors fans here, and B, the Kyle Skinner I told you so tour that we're going to embark on, because quite frankly, like, this is where it again did not make sense to try and show the loyalty that they did to those core players of, we're going to make a win now trade to try and get back into the play-in tournament. And, hey, we can still believe in what we've got in house. Spending the first rounder to acquire Poeltl, like, in a vacuum, if you've got tons of capital and you're a piece away from contending for a championship, not contending to possibly be in the play-in tournament, that's a move you make. So it just didn't make sense from the beginning, and now they're kind of reaping the not rewards, I guess the other side of the coin of that equation at this point, because you move down 2 spots. It was top 6 protected. It now conveys to San Antonio. San Antonio is sitting pretty, but even the picks that you do have now, like I've already beaten this dead horse to death at this point. Like, it's a historically weak draft class that is coming up here. And the only saving grace is outside of maybe the top 4 picks. Everyone's kind of a lotto ticket at this point. But the ceiling on a lot of these guys is capped, as far as even if you do hit that lotto ticket, there aren't any of those hidden diamonds that kind of, you can look at and say, great school, blue blood pedigree, highly sought recruit, maybe fizzled out in March Madness earlier than they were supposed to. That's why his draft stock kind of fell a little bit. It's going to be like, if they hit on it at 19 or at 31, or if, would they make any kind of trades to kind of move back up, it's going to be nice, serviceable role player, like maybe fringe starter. So there's definitely some intriguing names, but they're intriguing names for teams that are ready to contend at this point. Like, you look at the Oklahoma City Thunder, even after a really strong year, not a lot of people are still saying, like, Zach Edey, locked and loaded, guaranteed top 10 pick, but he's someone who, and you can see it playing out in their series against Dallas right now, like, they've already got a stretch big starter in Chet Holmgren. What they need is that, okay, they're absolutely hammering us down low in the paint. Let's get that big body in there and maybe spell Holmgren for some stretches here and there. Like, he's a perfect selection for them at number 12. So even some of those homegrown talents, like, because it's so weak, I have to assume that someone's probably taking a swing at Edey before 19. So even those feel good stories aren't even in play. Are they getting anyone that's really going to move the needle that much? I would hope so, but I'm not optimistic. And you add them in to the mix that they've got right now. Are they that much better next year? Like, now you're going to be probably picking in the teens next year. You're not going to be a playoff team unless all of a sudden Scotty Barnes does his best, Luka Doncic impression, or just takes his game to the next level. So they're kind of stuck in no man's land right now, is the real consensus that I think a lot of people around the NBA are looking at and going, this was not the draft that they were hoping that they were going to fall in. I thought personally, just because of Raptors luck, like, hey, historically weak draft class, this is the year that they win it all again as Bargnani 2.0.
Yeah, and I understand where you're coming from. I get the points that you're making. I understand where a lot of Raptors fans are coming with the frustration of, you made this trade without the foresight of, okay, well, we don't know how good we're going to be in the next couple of years. I'm going to take the devil's advocate approach to this, because I honestly think that it has netted out fairly well in the grand scheme of things when you kind of peel back the onion.
Okay? I can't wait for these mental gymnastics that are about to take place here.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, get the whiteboards out, start making some notes, and let's break it down. So,
who is Pepe Silvia?
He was Pepe Silvia. Pepe Silvia. For anyone who doesn't get that reference, I mean, Kyle and I like to reference a few different shows on this program, and It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia is obviously one of our go-tos. So go check that one out. It's definitely very good, very good.
Binge watch late night noise to have on in the background.
Exactly, very good homage to what we're about to talk about. So you look at what you just said with the historically weak draft. 100% agree. I mean, what are you getting in the top 6 that's potentially moving the needle for your team this coming season? The name that was always kind of dangled around the Raptors of where they were maybe looking to, bring in, kind of fits the mold of a young athletic team, was Rob Dillingham from Kentucky. Well, Rob Dillingham kind of brings the same traits to the table that an Emmanuel Quickley does, who you just traded for from the New York Knicks. So it didn't really make any sense when they were talking about that at the time. So I look at that and say, okay, Emmanuel Quickley is a better player than Rob Dillingham is at the current time, right? You get a veteran player, knows what he's doing, knows the NBA game, knows the lifestyle, seemed to enjoy his time in Toronto since he's been here from New York. So let's take that off the table. Now, you look at some of the other names that are bandied about the draft who are they going to be taking? There's a couple prospects from France, prospect from Australia, prospect from Serbia, all kind of those stretch 4, stretch 5, like you just mentioned with Chet Holmgren, that style of player. But again, nobody really knows what they're going to become. So in the grand scheme of things, is it the worst thing in the world to have traded that first round pick for a guy like Jakob Poeltl, who is a good starting center in the NBA? No, right? You already drafted him, so obviously the staff is very high on what he brings to the table. You saw, the lack of rebounding they had when he wasn't in the lineup last year. He's a very good rebounder. He's very good at at positioning underneath the basket, which is exactly what you want from your bigs. Kelly Olynyk is there for depth. He's not going to be a starter. He's going to be the guy to come off the bench and kind of be that 3 and D type of guy. And I say D loosely because he's not exactly the best defensive center in the league. So I look at Jakob Poeltl as being better than what they could have got at that selection that they would have had in this year's draft. You see doomsday scenario. I think the doomsday scenario would have been if they had to give up next year's selection in a much stronger draft with the potential of them picking in the same area. You know what I mean? So if they have a top 10 selection next year in a stronger draft, would you be saying, man, I'm sure glad that we had that top 6 pick, last year in 2024? Probably not. So when you look at the makeup of the roster, Poeltl, I put the greater than sign of anybody they're taking in the top 6, correct? I look at Emmanuel Quickley with the greater than symbol of Rob Dillingham, who's been linked to them more often than not. With the now leaked footage of Zach Edey just draining 3 after 3 after 3 at the NBA Combine, probably going to get a little bit more of a look in the top 15 in this year's draft, because that was the big knock on him, right? He couldn't stretch the floor. Now he's showing the ability to do so. So yeah, maybe you don't end up with Edey falling into your lap at 19 or 31. But there's also a pretty intriguing name out there right now that a lot of people aren't that high on because of 1, his size, 2, his college production, and 3, living in his father's shadow.
If you go down this rabbit hole, oh boy.
Listen,
we're doing it. It's coming out tonight, are we?
Yeah. I'm gonna bring it out of his cage and let's open it up for what it is. So Bronny James, obviously famous father of LeBron James.
You may have heard of him before.
Fairly significant basketball player. He just finished his first season at USC. Unfortunately suffered a heart attack, right as the season was starting. Didn't play a whole lot. When he did come back, he had a minutes restriction based on health concerns, yada, yada, yada. You look at the athletic profile that he's got, obviously genetics are a thing, right? Genetics are a very strong indicator of what an athlete can become. LeBron James is a superhuman athlete. Bronny James obviously has inherited some of those genes, so he's shown off a 40-inch vertical. He has shown off the ability to drive the lane at the combine. Again, this is all just a small sample size because we haven't been able to see it over a full season. But just with the potential, just with the exposure that you'd get and the media, exposure that you'd get, the marketability that you'd get, would it not be worth exploring that at number 19 and say, you know what? We know the kid isn't ready yet, but what can he be in 2 to 3 years from now? And I see you rubbing your eyes, and I see you kind of thinking about all the negative things you're going to say to this. But again, in this year's draft, there's really not anybody that's moving that needle forward, right? So you have to say potential. What's the potential for this pick? Are we going to take someone who's 24 years old from overseas that can come in and give us bench minutes? Yeah, you could do that. But does that really move the needle for anybody? Does that excite anybody? No. So you know what? Take the home run swing. If you strike out, hey, this happens all the time in the first round. Pick number 19 to 31. Look at all the, the Hall of Famers that end up in that slot. Not many. So why not? Take a swing, bring in a guy who can at least sell some tickets, sell some jerseys that are better than a Terrence Ross jersey. And let's just see where the Toronto Circus can go next year and, gear up for a better draft in 2025.
That pitch has never indicated more your past history of working in the sales department for pro sports franchises in my entire life than what it is right there. Because that is what Bronny James is. He is a guaranteed get your G League team on the map. He is not an NBA player by any stretch of the imagination, and wouldn't even be someone that we're talking about, jokes aside, probably a nice kid here, unless his dad was LeBron James. He's been listed at 6'4" on every roster he's ever played at.
6'1".
Guess what? They just leaked his actual 6'1"
Yeah.
is his height, undersized guard, 5 points a game in college. You can say he was in over his head and rough start to the year and this, that, the other.
Minutes restriction.
Minutes restriction. Don't, oh my god, like don't even get me started on the fact that he wouldn't have even been recruited to USC if not for the fact that dad was in his class. And we'll actually get to someone who was in Bronny's original high school draft class a little bit later in this episode.
Little foreshadowing there for you.
Let me tell you, stick around till the end here. We're gonna bring it all together here. All the Pepe Sylvia lines are gonna converge.
Home to roost.
Yeah, but honest to God, like, and you know what? Let's give him the benefit of the doubt here and say, hey, genetics are going to kick in at some point. Maybe he grows another inch or two, right? Dad's going to be in the gym, working with him, whatever. What's his legitimate timeline? 3 years down the line? 4 years down the line? He's sniffing at the NBA at this point? Like, we're talking multiple draft classes that go by before he's even going to be NBA ready here. What is likely going to happen with Bronny James is you are going to get this fly-by-night franchise like the Charlotte Hornets, who are going to do exactly what you just laid out. Hey, we're going nowhere. We're in purgatory. No one even takes us seriously in our home state, right? Like, that's a team that I can see going down this Bronny James rabbit hole here and being a legitimate on their draft board type person, specifically just so that they can say, hey, let's link the James name to our franchise at some point here, right? If not for the fact that LeBron is trying to hold on until Bronny is ready to play in the NBA so that he can say he played with his son in the NBA, Bronny wouldn't even be declaring for this draft because of everything that he's already gone through, right? So it's just like, if you took away the last names and this was just a parent whose son, right, had a heart attack, averaged 5 points, is 6'1", right, is on nobody's draft boards right now, and was entering the league, like, everyone would be like, red flag to the umpteenth degree. This is an insane family. What are they doing with this kid? He's going to fizzle out in 2 years. But because it's LeBron's kid, we're just giving him a pass. Like, I hate to fault the kid because the kid has done nothing wrong here, right? And he's a teenager still. So I'm not going to try and crap on his dreams here. But, like, at a certain point, you need to put the perspective on this as far as he is not, as of today, right, in May 2024, an NBA prospect, and he wouldn't even be discussed unless he had the last name James here. So if the Toronto Raptors do end up doing that, I hope to God it's some sort of magic in the second round or something that they do. Because if they legitimately have a 19th overall pick and they're taking that home run swing right there, Masai Ujiri is not working in that front office within 3 years, and I would bet my life on it. Because my God, he would go down. That would be the pick that forget the championship. He would be remembered probably more for that pick when they do all the recaps at the end of the year on Sports Center and the worst of the year, best of the year, all that. Like, that would be the thing that pops up first when you Google Masai. It wouldn't be the parade, wouldn't be all the millions of dollars he's raised for the community, all the good he's done for Toronto. It would be that pick. So if he's going to go out there and stake his reputation on the line, 19th overall for Bronny James, good luck is all I've got to say.
Again, the passion that comes out of you whenever you feel strongly about a certain topic is palpable. You know what I mean? It radiates through the screen. Everybody feels it. But again, I look at the NBA draft as being probably the biggest crapshoot out of any draft in professional sport, because there's only 2 rounds. You only have a finite amount of players that you can bring onto your roster. And how many players actually pan out like they're supposed to in the NBA? Not many, right? So at the end of the day, Toronto's shown over the course of their over the course of the franchise's inception, that they've been willing to take big swings on these hit and miss players, right? Started out with Tracy McGrady. Didn't pan out for Toronto right then, but look what he became. He eventually became one of the best scorers in the NBA, because that's something that was, seen to be. Right?
I liken this more akin to if they go out there and grab him at 19th overall, that's more like the Vancouver Grizzlies, big country Bryant Reeves selection, rather than Tracy McGrady, who was a highly sought after recruit and was just viewed as raw. But the could jump out of the gym, the intangibles were there. Not a 6'1". Well, my dad's famous.
So, but again, like I was going to make the point of, a couple years later, they draft Jonathan Bender, another high school project, right? Trade him away for Antonio Davis. You fast forward a few more years. Okay, they take, maybe a not ready for the NBA Charlie Villanueva. Okay, did it pan out? Maybe, maybe not. According to some people, it did. According to some people, it didn't. Then you go to what was probably one of Masai's worst draft picks, which is Bruno Caboclo, right? I think a lot of people will try to compare these scenarios to one another. For one, hey, they're not shy to make that type of pick. But two, if you miss on it, you're pretty much just having a guy sit on the end of your bench for the next 4 or 5 years, right? Mm-hmm. So, look, at the end of the day, like I said, you're going to make the pick one way or another, whether you trade it, whether you make it, is what it is. You're going to get some player, some type of compensation for that pick. Is it worth it to you to pick someone on potential as opposed to picking someone who, he's going to be our 9th guy for the next 4 years, right? So to me, is it worth it? Yes, because it checks off more boxes than it has X's over. But to your point, I understand where you're coming from. Because again, would this conversation be happening if he wasn't LeBron James' son? You could make the strong argument that it wouldn't, right? But let's be honest. The kid is an athlete. The kid has stayed out of trouble. Let's give him a chance to show what he can do with a full season under his belt, right? Whether that's back in college or, learning the NBA for a season. Then we can make the assumption 3 years down the road, hey, that was a great pick, or, okay, that definitely wasn't one of the Raptors' best selections in the course of their history. But I'm a risk taker, as you know. I'd be more than willing to make the gamble that, look, if we can have even a 10% of what his dad brought to the table, that's an absolute home run grand slam for this franchise.
I really hope that there's someone in the automotive industry listening to this right now, because I want to set up a scenario where we get you and your wife side by side, and it's like, hey, Kyle, we're going to give you a brand new Honda Civic. All you got to do is sign right here, right? It'll do its job. It'll be the 9th man, right? Might not be the first car you pull out of the laneway, but it'll do the job. It'll go on the highway. Or you can reach into this 1 in a million bucket, and if you pull the red ball, that Ferrari out there is yours. And I would love to just see the back and forth of, I've always wanted a Ferrari there, hon. You know how I feel about fast cars, because that's literally what this situation is. You are banking on that 1 in a million chance that he puts it all together. I see a scenario more likely that he flames out within 5 years and isn't even in the league, G League, let alone NBA, being more likely than he goes on to be a perennial all-star. But again, we'll return to this topic on episode 4000 when Bronny James at age 39, announces his retirement from some obscure league in Turkey.
Or is walking off, having his victory lap tour of a celebrated career in the NBA. But anyways, long story short, back to your comparison, wouldn't be a very hard conversation to have because I wouldn't fit in a Honda Civic. So I'll take the chance of getting that
It
Ferrari.
could have been her car. Could have been her car. Yeah, because you would fit so much better in the Ferrari there, eh?
And you know what? I look better squishing in a Ferrari than I would squish into a Honda Civic. Let's put it that way. All right.
Uh,
Seeing as how we could talk about this forever, because I don't think we're convincing one or the other to lean towards the other side.
Hour 9 of the episode, and
yeah.
we're still on topic number 1.
Let's go again. We'll keep it north of the border with another basketball topic, and huge news out of the WNBA last week that just announced the Toronto expansion franchise in the WNBA is on its way in 2026. Golf clap for the market of Toronto, but especially a golf clap for the WNBA for finally getting off their patoots and making the decision to bring a franchise north of the border, which was well overdue. So again, this is fantastic news for Toronto and Canada basketball.
Yeah, absolutely huge news. Couldn't be coming at a better time. Right now, obviously, we record these on Tuesday nights and release it to you fine folks on Wednesday mornings. But actually got to sit down with my daughter and watch the first half of the Caitlin Clark inaugural WNBA game. And bit of a rough start for Caitlin. Won't deep dive into that, American team. But a huge time to be getting into that market. And you look at the fact that more and more Canadians are starting to go to prominent Div 1 universities down there. And they've got a slew of prospects, and even some, we just had a few go in the last couple of years here, and Letitia Emma here, and we just had Alicia Edwards get drafted this year as well too. So by the time 2026 rolls around, depending how the expansion draft process even plays out, there could be a potential that they kind of select maybe a hometown hero of some sort there and bring them
Oh,
back to north of the border. And hey, look at us go. It's going to be a huge, huge moment for not only women's sports in the country, but just basketball in the country, because there's never been more girls and moms and grandmothers, everyone in between, paying attention to the sport. And it's definitely a movement, not a moment at this point. So the fact that Toronto is going to be getting in there at kind of the ground floor, it bodes really, really well. And I think they're going to be absolutely best in class, probably from the
yeah,
onset here. And that market's just going to be eating up tickets left, right, and center.
100%. And to that point, do you think that Juju Watkins can file a petition to leave college early and declare for the draft? Because that'd be nice.
Yeah.
Start off a once in a lifetime type of point guard like that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, that's just it. Like, honestly, if you look at the history of the WNBA drafts here as well, too, like typically along the top, unless you're getting like a Diana Taurasi or a Sue Bird or something like that, like it's mostly bigs that go up at the top.
Yeah.
There hasn't been, over the last couple of decades, we're kind of talking about that high level elite point guard who can shoot the lights out, a la Caitlin Clark, a la Paige Beckers, who's probably going #1 next year, a la Jushi Watkins, who's currently playing out on the West Coast for USC right now. Like, just because of the huge advancements in skills training, personal training, they're actually taking strength and conditioning, all of that, like all these things that have been on the men's side for so long. But we talked a few episodes ago about how like it was just a few years ago in the COVID bubble where it was like, all right, Ritz Carlton for the men's tournament and ham and cheese sandwiches and a few dumbbells in a corner for the women's. Like, it's crazy what happens when you actually invest in the women's sport, the strides that happen in such a short period of time. But you've got these absolutely electric guards who can take over games. And it's no longer the, hey, unless you're 6'4" or taller, good luck getting picked in the first round. It very much is a guard driven league at this point. And yeah, there could be some absolute studs coming out in the next couple of years. So it's an exciting time on both the collegiate ranks and professional ranks as well, too, if you're a hoops fan.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at the Toronto market itself. I mean, they've embraced the Raptors team so wholeheartedly from the get go.
Mm-hmm.
Whether they've been good, bad, terrible, Kyle's world is falling apart because Masai Ujiri is making this move after this move. the fan base is as passionate as you're going to see in the NBA. I think it's going to be just as good, if not better, for the WNBA franchise because, again, it's going to be Canada's only team.
Yeah.
So you got a whole country rallying behind one franchise, and hopefully this kind of opens up the eyes to not only the WNBA but the NBA to say, maybe bringing a second or third team up to Canada may not be a bad idea because you know what? At the time that we had Vancouver in there, obviously that was at a time in history where the Canadian dollar was just so low. It just didn't make sense to have it at that time, right? Luckily, Toronto fell into having Vince Carter and they were making hand over fist. It didn't really matter what the value of the dollar was. So fast forward to now, where again, we're not really as strong as the American dollar, but it's better, right? It's more sustainable than it used to be. So you look at markets like Montreal, like Quebec City, like Vancouver, Calgary, these are all markets that can house a professional team, men's, women, whatever sport you want to look at. So I think to your point, it's never been a better time to come up and get a franchise in this country because there's more appetite for it across the country.
Yeah.
That's the most exciting part. So regardless of how it plays out, I think that this is such a huge moment for not only women's sports, but sports in general in Canada. Because again, it's showing that these big professional leagues are looking up, to our country to bring these, new expansion franchises up here. So to all the young girls out there who are picking up a basketball for the first time, this is such a big moment, that you can look at and say, hey, I watched, a WNBA game in Toronto with my mom and dad. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I can realistically say it's something that I can achieve, if I really put my mind to it. So 100%, I'm happy to hear that you're already, brainwashing your daughter to, get into the basketball type of thing because she does have height. I mean, she's a tall girl, so that's good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, kind of tying it into former guest of the show there, Mr. Mike Moriali, who was the commissioner of the CEBL. I mean, that's also been something that's been on their radar as well, too, as far as not only continuing to grow the men's side, but how do we create a domestic professional league for women in Canada here, right? And so now that announcement has kind of been made official, you can almost kind of see it lining up, right? Where 2 years out, got enough time to kind of put some infrastructure in place. And guess what? There's only going to be one, WNBA team coming in. But if you're strategic about maybe placing some teams in some smaller markets there, like, Hamilton and Ottawa, Montreal, or whatever, and it doesn't have to, it doesn't have to be, these giant, coast to coast leagues in year one, but you can almost ride that wave of like, hey, it's 2026. This is the summer. WNBA is coming in. Oh, by the way, here you've got all these kind of CEBL options as well, too, that if you can't make it to, as of yet unnamed, Toronto franchises, home opener or whatever, there's a local option for you that you can continue to see high level ball. And from there, the trickle down effects are, again, the youth sports as well, too. And I think that's truly what's been missing. And you and I have talked about it offline a ton, right? Is people who don't work in sports or aren't heavily involved in sports don't understand all the things that go in, all the benefits of having either a professional or a collegiate or even a semi-pro or thriving amateur sports scene in your town, right? You drive through any butthole in America and their football stadium probably puts our CFL stadiums to shame here. Like they're these ridiculous facilities. And you would think that it's, going to be the Patriots training ground or whatever in the off season, but trust me, America gets a lot of things wrong. They don't get the sports aspect wrong. The homecoming, the, pageantry, community rallying, like there's so much good that comes from these things that I don't think we need to get to that extreme in the next 5 years, but you need to start taking sports a little bit more serious as a uniting factor, especially, not to go into a geopolitical rabbit hole here, but bring people together over something. And sports does that, especially in a time where people are probably more divided than ever.
Yeah, like Kyle and I on the future of the Toronto Raptors draft.
Yeah.
Uh,
The irony being, I'm not even a Raptors fan. It's just that on the one hand, you know what? Golf clap to Masai for giving us just topic after topic to speak about. Because if he was just standing at the plate, roping frozen rope doubles off the wall and homers, like it would be tough to have these round table discussions all the time about it.
yeah, and the last thing I'll say on the expansion up here, I mean, it's we can't put into words the impact that it's going to have. Like Kyle just mentioned, at the grassroots level, all the way up to U Sport, all the way up to a potential CBL, league that we have for women to play in. And I mean, the thought that comes to my mind when you mentioned the potential of the expansion into, having a full league in Canada, why not pitch it to be the new G League of the WNBA,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you can't make it on a WNBA roster, regardless of where you're trying out, whether it be in, for the LA Sparks or for the Mercury or for the new Toronto expansion franchise,
Yeah.
come on up and play ball in Canada and you'll have a shot to make a roster next year.
Yeah,
right?
because Lord knows, like, if for those who don't follow the WNBA, like, unlike other professional leagues, you could be a top 10 draft pick and
Not
get
even,
and get waived that
yeah,
year. Like that is how few spots there are in that league and how, you know, precious those veterans hold on to those spots, for life and death. So there's not a
yeah,
whole lot of turnover year to year, right? So that would be
yeah,
huge if they can get some sort of partnership or affiliate agreement. So Mike, if you're listening and that comes to fruition there, you heard it here first.
yes, yes, absolutely. Um, Sticking with the last basketball topic of the night, because obviously we're very basketball heavy, but we made mention a few episodes ago of obviously Ottawa favorite Coach Dave Smart, who just made the move from Texas Tech University to take over the Pacific University basketball program. And again, we thought at the time it was going to be such a fantastic move for not only him but for the program because of the new way of thinking that they're going to, that they're going to have ultimately at the school. And we've already seen some things start to come to fruition already. So not only has he come in and implemented his new system, but he's also landed probably one of the top transfers across all of the NCAA landscape in Elijah Fisher.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are your thoughts on already making the impact of bringing in a top level NCAA prospect to a team like Pacific, who had such a poor reputation before he got there?
Yeah. Well, absolutely. Right. It's massive for the program. It's probably uh, in the conversation for their most high profile transfer to that school ever. Right.
Ever.
And for those that don't know, Elijah Fisher, he's a GTA kid.
Yep.
He was, and this is what I alluded to earlier, put whatever faith you want into these kind of high school rankings, but ESPN and some of these, Slam magazine, all of that. This was Bronny James's high school class, and at one point, Elijah Fisher was the number one recruit in that class, ahead of Bronny James, when everyone was still assuming he was going to be 6'5" like his dad. So this is not an insignificant transfer by any stretch of the imagination. He was the top ranked Canadian guard, again, North Pole hoops and Monday morning scouting service there, Wes Brown in Toronto. Like they all put together all these profiles. Everyone had him unanimous. He was dominating kids 2-3 years older than him coming up through. And he's kind of had a bit of a journey south of the border so far. Has bounced around. This is now his third school, so he has kind of been a transfer portal darling, but whether that's more so him or that's just the landscape of
Yeah.
college sports now with the nil money and this, that, the other, that's conversation for another day. But at the end of the day, like this is exactly what you want to see if you're a fan of Pacific. As far as Dave Smart's coming in, he's a Canadian coach. He's bringing in one of the most highly recruited Canadian basketball high school players in recent memory to your program that wouldn't have even been on his top 10 list. Like this is a kid who had offers from Kentucky and Texas Tech and some pretty big programs south of the border, played meaningful minutes last season. So he is going to come in and be your leading scorer from day one and is someone who, if he puts together like a tremendous season, might be a fringe NBA kind of G League prospect, but will go and play professional basketball somewhere. And that's not something that even, 5% of all of the NCAA players can say. That, once that final buzzer goes, a lot of them are accountants the next week, right?
Yeah.
So this is an absolutely massive get, and it's showing that Dave is being smart in his recruitment of Canadian athletes and leveraging the fact that he's a known commodity north of the border. Whereas if he walks into somewhere in Ohio or Florida and, oh, I'm the coach of Pacific University and I won a bunch of national championships with Carleton, like they'll be like, well, that means nothing to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's kind of what we talked about when we mentioned, him taking the job at Pacific. This is exactly what he's going to do. He's going to go after the players that know him, that know his pedigree, and who know what he brings to the table. And this is exactly why you get a guy like Elijah Fisher. This moves the needle, right? This moves the needle now, so people are paying attention to Pacific University. Long before, any of us were even paying attention to this school, there's only been, one, to my knowledge, one player from this program who's been drafted in the NBA. You know who that was?
Who is that? Who is the famous Pacific alum?
Number 1 overall in 1998, Michael Olowokandi.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Look at that throwback.
So you look at the time frame of the last time there was an impactful player for that program. That's pretty much it, right? There may have been a few odds and ends here and there, but none to the degree of what he brought to the table. So this is exactly why you went out and got a guy outside of the box like a Dave Smart if you're Pacific, Pacific's athletic director. Mm-hmm. Hey, winning pedigree from, I don't care what you call it. The winning percentage we talked about he had at Carleton University can't go unnoticed. NCAA, U Sport, whatever. He's beating NCAA programs with U Sport teams, right? Now, he wouldn't have been able to touch a guy like Elijah Fisher at Carleton because obviously he's destined to go down and play in the NCAA. Here's his chance to get this big high-profile player, right? Now you start to see something, and again, we've seen it with the transfer portal nowadays. Once there's one big high-profile player who goes, well, guess who else is sitting in the portal? Well, wasn't really on my list to start with, but Pacific's looking a little bit better than, maybe going to, be the 6th man or 7th man at Kentucky or, at Florida or at Alabama, wherever it may be. Hey, West Coast, get to go out and have meaningful minutes right out of the gate. This could be a very good situation for Pacific University to really kind of make a huge step in year 1 of Dave Smart's tenure there. So, hey, golf clap to coach for, getting Elijah Fisher to come in and kind of be the face of his new franchise. And I'm excited. I'm excited to see what leads, what this leads to.
Yeah. And I think the days of Pacific putting up, count on one hand win totals of the season are probably going to be a thing of the past pretty quickly.
Yeah. I think they'll actually win a conference game this year, which is the right direction. So
baby steps in year 1.
Yeah, baby steps in year 1. But yeah, fantastic news. It was very, very nice and welcome to hear because again, we called it a few weeks ago. Don't want to toot our own horn, but again, if you want to know what's going to happen a few weeks in the future, just listen to the show, guys. Yeah. That's all it is. We've been doing it. We've been doing it since episode 1. Every week we say something's going to happen. It happens. It's the way that it goes. Speaking of just the way that it goes, this is something that really kind of, came on my radar very, very, hot and bothered because this is something that I'm passionate about being a former coach and, hearing somebody who's in the profession kind of speak to it the way that he did, it really resonates with you and it kind of puts things in perspective to where we are. You talk about where the modern day athlete goes with the transfer portal. Well, the modern day coach has to go through, different things that other coaches didn't have to years prior. And of course, we're talking about Peter DeBoer and his recent comments about the landscape of NHL coaches. So for anyone who didn't hear what he said, I'll give you in their own words just now, and then we can kind of break it down and go from there. So again, was asked the other day about the coaching carousel that's been happening in the NHL. Obviously, he's been through it himself a few times, getting fired from some high-profile jobs with Vegas, with San Jose, and also with New Jersey. And this is basically what his answer was. He said, "It's insanity. We coach in an age where everyone talks about the modern athlete, building relationships in order to coach them. How do you do that with this kind of turnover? It's like going on a date and getting married and divorced before the appetizers even show up. I don't get it, but that's the world we live in." First of all, fantastic comparison. It was very, very illiterate and extremely, extremely accurate, because that's what it is. It's, what have you done for me lately? And it's not the, hey, let's build around this guy, let him work with these players, build something internally, and then see the fruits of our labor come out after. It's, if you don't win in year one, you're out. Right? We just saw it with the Phoenix Suns. Phoenix went out, fired one of their best coaches in franchise history, Monty Williams. They brought in a guy like Frank Vogel, won an NBA championship with the Lakers, has been to a few of them with the Pacers, comes to Phoenix to take over the super team that they just built. Obviously they get bounced in the first round of the playoffs. What just happened with them? Frank Vogel is now sitting on the unemployment line, and they're looking at bringing in a guy who was also cast out unjustly from Milwaukee, and Mike Budenholzer. Yeah. So, I mean, this is the landscape of coaching. You really don't know if you're going to be coaching next week, let alone next year. And it really does kind of raise some alarms, because is this a sign of the players now have such an impact on the coach itself that they don't even get looked at as, look, the players are, ultimately the ones who perform on the ice, right? And again, I've been on both sides of it as a player and a coach. I see it from both sides. As a player, I see how a coach can directly impact what you do. As a coach, I see how much work you put into trying to get a lineup together that can do what you ask them to do. You have the perfect game plan, and then all of a sudden, it just doesn't show up on the field, on the ice, whatever it may be. It's a very tough balancing act. And unless you have a strong relationship with ownership to be able to convince them that this is all part of the plan, we're growing and building something. I mean, perfect example, you look at Detroit Lions, what they've been able to do. The Ford family invested in both Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell. At the time, everyone laughed at them and said, "Oh, this is ridiculous. He's making comments about biting kneecaps, and this is going to be, he's going to be out of there in 2 years." Look what Detroit's done, right? So back to Peter DeBoer's comments. I mean, this guy is a perennial winner in the NHL. Everywhere he goes, he's won. It just so happens that every time he gets let go, the person who precedes him just does better, right? So I understand where he's coming from with the frustration. I would absolutely think the same thing if I'm coaching in the professional ranks now, because at the end of the day, there's really no job security. And this is why, again, they talk about player contracts being guaranteed, because you can be cut at any time. This is why coaching contracts are guaranteed, because you can literally be fired even with the best record in the league, because you have disagreement with the owner, general manager, best player on the team, whatever it may be.
Yeah. We've essentially entered the opposite end of the spectrum of the Toe Blake eras, and these guys essentially being like, "Hey, you're gonna run in my show, otherwise you're never gonna play in the NHL ever again," right? Like, it's very much permeated all the way down to the grassroots level and the AAU mentality, as far as, if you didn't get the result you wanted, it's not your fault. It's clearly, coaching, GM, owner, whatever, right? So I'm going to jump ship. So you look at some of these basketball players, they've played on like 12 clubs by the time they get through high school here, right? So it's definitely something that's been percolating for many, many years now. And now we're kind of reaping that effect because no one kept it in check. On the one hand, you'll get a certain portion of the fan base that'll say, like, "Listen, it's not my money. My ownership group wants to keep cutting checks to people who aren't with the franchise anymore to not coach our team, to bring in someone new, whatever. What do I care? But look at the teams that are continuously successful. They typically have the least change involved, right?
Yep.
Brady, Belichick, Kraft. When things go wrong, they go south in a hurry. But for 2 decades, my God, there was not a franchise in the NFL that did it better than them. Your beloved Pittsburgh Steelers. How many
Yep.
years has Mr. Tomlin now strung together 500 or better seasons, right? Never had a losing record there. Then you wonder, like, why are the Carolina Panthers so bad? Well, it's because they don't even allow a coach to get his seat warm before they're yanking the rug out from underneath him there and David Tepper. So, you can call it what it is. You can blame the players to a degree, right? Because yeah, they're the ones that sell tickets. No one pays money to show up to watch someone pace up and down the bench and bark at players and open the gates and all of that. Like that's not what is going to put butts in seats. So to a degree, the players are more valuable than the coaches. But in terms of creating that culture, like how many athletes can you think of off the top of your head that have been actual culture setters within their respective sport? Not a whole lot.
No, it's a very small percentage. And I mean, that's one of the roles you have when you bring in a coach, is that you want to have that big voice who is the CEO of your franchise,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's the thing. Like I always compare it to a CEO of a company, because what the coach goes out and says, you want to see the players say and do as well, right? It's one voice, it's one vision, one lane that you're in. And yeah, it's kind of a weird scenario that we're in right now, because you really don't see a lot of coach player relationships like you used to,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like you don't see these coaches who are inducting players into the Hall of Fame, very much anymore. You don't see players inducting coaches into the Hall of Fame anymore. There's kind of been a divide of, all right, well, yes, coaches are blaming players are blaming coaches, and there's no unity there, right? It's always me against me. And that's what you were talking about earlier. It starts at such a young age level now that it kind of has the trickle up effect, because now the players who are getting treated like that, the coaches who are getting treated like that at the lower levels, every time they move up or advance, that's the normal for them. Yeah. Right. So yeah, it's very few and far between where you can now say, look, Tom Landry coached the Dallas Cowboys for over 30 years.
Yeah.
Right. When are you ever going to see another coach for 10 plus years with the same franchise, let alone 30?
Yeah.
I don't think you're going to see it.
Now, you might see sparks of that at like the collegiate level, where like these guys almost become institutions, right? And we're starting to see kind of a mass exodus of coaches who have been long tenured there. But in the professional ranks, like
forget
it. You have to essentially have a Hall of Fame ready coach who you're just like, listen, we're happy to have you until you call it a career. Otherwise, like you say, it's probably, if you can get a full contract cycle out of that coach and you get renewed, that's a win for you. And you're probably one of the longest tenured coaches in the league.
And I think the problem too is, I think we may mention this a few times, is that too many times ownership and front offices, they listen too much to the fan bases.
Mm-hmm.
And now, don't get me wrong, you have to listen to your fan base, because they're the ones who are obviously paying to come to the games, right? You have to make sure that you're putting a competitive product on the field, on the ice, on the court, whatever it may be. However, they're not the ones who are keeping you employed.
No.
It is the ownership. So,
and on that note, it's literally a product of our times, right? Because guess what? If a fan base was pissed off in the 1960s, maybe they start slowly phasing out of showing up to games. And that's really kind of your only way to see, what's the temperature of our fan base right now? Are they actually buying tickets? Are the tickets that are being bought actually being redeemed at the gate, et cetera, et cetera? Now, all you have to do is just log on to Twitter or Instagram or whatever, and you're probably getting blown up after a bad game with 1,000 hate mails and DMs and this, that, the other. So
Yeah.
every little molehill and things that used to just be a bump in the road that wouldn't even register with the owner or the GM in the past is now a talking point by Stephen A. Smith, leading off ESPN's flagship talking head show the next day.
Yeah. And I mean, coming from a talking head show that we're on right now, but I mean, obviously we're trying to be as, as objective as possible, right? Like we want to make sure that we're taking, both sides of the coin and evaluating them equally. So yeah, like what I'll say to that is that ownership has to have a strong belief in the people that they bring in to run their club operation. And that is where you see a huge disconnect. And now, in today's sport landscape, because you've got a lot of these billionaires who are either inheriting money from relatives, who are either making their money through tech, because obviously that's where we're seeing a lot of these self-made billionaires coming into money, and they really don't have any knowledge of the back end of sport, right? They're kind of just fans of the game, and they treat it like they're a fan of the game. And that's the problem, because they pull the trigger in 2 seconds instead of evaluating things for the for the greater good. And I mean, you look at you mentioned the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'll just use them because obviously I'm very well versed in their club history and kind of how their ownership structure is set up. The Rooney family's owned that team since day one.
Mm-hmm.
So you have these new owners who are inheriting the club, whose fathers and grandfathers and whatnot ran the club before them. So they understand that, look, there's a thing that we can't buy, and that's culture.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I think, again, that's a huge reason why we're seeing what we're seeing right now with coaches just being let go unceremoniously, is because you've got these fans who just happen to be billionaires and own the team, who are saying, well, I didn't like what you said to the media there. I didn't like how you treated the best player on the team. So you got to go.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, to kind of wrap everything up in a nice little bow, you mentioned the Carolina Panthers of the world. And I mean, you go to the ice hockey realm. I mean, you're looking at, the bad teams are always the ones who go through coaches, Ottawa Senators. That's just the nature of the beast, right? They're not.
Ironically, at the time of his firing, DJ Smith, by some divine intervention, was actually one of the longest tenured coaches in the NHL.
Yeah, but I mean, you look at the last 15 years of that franchise, how many head coaches have they had?
Yeah, all right. It's been churn and burn for sure. And I think that's kind of my last point here, is just the thing that drives me a little bit crazy about, regardless of sport, this churn and burn cycle of coaching is, if you're going to do that, fine. But don't just keep retreading. If it's a 32 team league, you've got 40 names on a board and 8 of them are unemployed at any given moment, and they're the ones that just get cycled in, and it's just a game of musical chairs. Like, if you truly want a culture reset, like, go to the collegiate ranks, go to overseas, bring in a fresh new voice, maybe pick an assistant coach who has earned a strong reputation as, a real leader in the locker room. Like, that you can't have it both ways. You can't just continually cycle through coaches, but it's the same names over and over and over again, and hope that, on his 5th attempt, Lindy Ruff is going to turn it around this time, right? Like,
Yeah.
Give it to someone else, or just stick with what you've got until a true difference maker comes along.
Yeah. And, I'm happy that you brought that up too, because that was going to be my last point. It's going to get to a point now, if you go through too many of these coaches, the top ones aren't going to want to come and coach for you.
Yeah.
Because they require time, they require stability, they require respect. If they get those 3 things, you'll see them do what they can do, which is take your team, into a stratosphere that you want them to. Mm-hmm. But again, are you patient enough to deal with that? Which is the big question. So, I mean, kudos to Peter DeBoer for making those comments, because I think that's on every coach's mind in today's sport landscape. And I applaud him for using his platform to really kind of bring that to light there. So, yeah, on that note, we wanted to have a couple of quick little tidbits here to end off because, like we said, ton of stuff has been coming up the last couple of weeks. We've had to postpone some things. We took some topics off the burner. These have just been kind of sitting on our to-do list, let's say, for the last little while. But one of the things that happened, I think, was 2 weeks ago. Obviously, Canada had a huge loss with the passing of Bob Cole, legendary hockey announcer for CBC, and I mean, I think everybody can hear his voice in their head whenever they watch a hockey game, regardless of who's playing. Right?
Oh, baby.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, near the end, it was just so good because you could tell that he wasn't, the same Bob Cole that he was in years prior, but he still had those Bob Cole-isms that always came out that made it just so special to watch, especially people coming up, in our generation and the generation prior to us. There's so many special calls that Bob Cole made that obviously I think we could all just recite, word for word, given the opportunity. And what I wanted to actually do was get your take on what was your favorite Bob Cole call.
My favorite Bob Cole call was one that I was not a hockey fan to actually watch it live at that point. However, it has been replayed so many times in our lives that it's just kind of ingrained in our memory. And all I have to do is say Lemieux, North Stars, and you already know what highlight it is there, where he goes end to end and dekes every single one of them out. So I actually queued up the exact call, and it's everything you would expect out of Bob Cole, and you can almost see him getting more excited as the play is going along there, which I think is, when I think of Bob Cole, exactly what comes to mind, right? Like, he just kind of is going through the motions, and all of a sudden something will happen and he turns into a little kid again, right? He just happens to have a microphone in front of his face. So it's here's Lemieux to center, penalty coming up. Look at Lemieux. Oh my goodness, what a goal, what a move. Lemieux, oh baby. for the infamous call there. And so that's my golf clap to good old Bobby Cole there. And lots of hockey memories, obviously, growing up in Canada, watching him call some pretty famous games there as well.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, the two of them that really kind of resonate with me, one, because it was, one of my favorite teams that would just happen to be playing in the game. And two, probably one of the biggest gaffes of any Stanley Cup call in history. Okay. So first, 1997 Oilers Stars, second round, series is tied 1-1, and Edmonton was down 3-0 going into the third period. They storm back. They tie it up with a minute left. Mike Greer was just absolutely dominant in that game, scored 2 goals. And then they get into overtime, and it's like, okay, Curtis Joseph's standing on his head. I don't know how much longer he can do this, right? Dallas is just all over them. And they throw out the fourth line for some reason. And it's like, oh, the fourth line, yeah, well, this is not, boding well if they're already resorting to the fourth line already. And Kelly Buchberger takes the puck and just absolutely roofs it over Jeff Hackett. And no other words needed to be said other than Bob Cole just shouting at the top of his lungs, Buchberger! And I just remember I jumped off my couch. I was so happy, the way that the game ended, but just with the perfection of that call, you didn't need anything else. Just the last name of the player. It was fantastic. It'll go down as my favorite Bob Cole call of all time.
As a side note, how has he not opened some sort of fast food hamburger chain at this point? Yeah, Buck-a-Burger.
Yeah, Buck-a-Burger. But when I'm mentioning the Stanley Cup call, I mean, 1999, Dallas again with the Buffalo Sabres.
Wow, look at them, a three-peat in our favorite calls here.
Yeah, and I mean, this one was really good because obviously it was Brett Hull who scored the goal, foot in the crease, whatever, aforementioned Lindy Ruff not being very happy with that. But when they're in front of the net, Bob Cole, again, as you mentioned, he's kind of going from a low to a high, and he's getting more excited as more people get involved in the crease. And you clearly see Brett Hull get the puck into the net. And of course, Bob Cole shouts, Mike Modano, Jody Hull, Brett Hull. And again, you really didn't care at the time because, one, it's a Stanley Cup winning goal. So obviously you're focused more on the actual play itself than the call. But the fact that he messed up the player, because Mike Modano and Brett Hull don't even wear even close to the same number, don't even look the same when they're on the ice. But no one cared, right? But it was just like, it's because it was Bob Cole. He was excited. You were excited regardless.
Yeah.
He could have said, Mario Lemieux. He wasn't even playing in the game. And no one would have cared because of just the passion that he brought to every single call that he made, even up to, the very end of his career. So let's get a golf clap for Bob Cole and the absolute legacy that he not only left for us as Canadians watching hockey, but I mean, just for hockey fans in general, just an absolute all-timer. I don't think you're ever going to see or hear another play-by-play, person with that type of passion again.
Yeah. Well, that's just it, right? Like, it's kind of a bygone era, right? And you can poke holes in some of their later in life kind of views and whatnot, but like, looking around the current landscape, like, who's the next Don Cherry? Who's the next, Bob Cole? Like, Elliot Friedman's on there. You got, Kevin Bieksa. Like, none of those guys are going to be talked about 10 years from now as like, oh, do you remember when this happened and he said this, and Bieksa released his Rock'em Sock'em 35, or like, it's very much is something that, unless you were a kid in the 80s or 90s, it's probably just a foreign thing to you, and you're like, who is Bob Cole? Like, why are people tweeting about that? Right? Like, it's just, it's definitely the last of kind of his kind, I would say, that unfortunately passed.
Yeah. And I mean, to your point, I think, Paul Bissonnette's probably the closest thing you're going to get to Don Cherry. Yeah. So I think if he wants to take up that mantle, he probably could. And yeah, from a just straight color commentary type of scenario, I mean, Chris Cuthbert's still going strong. He's always fun to listen to. Gord Miller, whenever he decides to do the World Juniors, iconic play-by-play voice. So there's still a few out there, but I mean, yeah, you're never going to be able to live up to the Bob Cole legacy that's been put ahead of you, regardless if you thought it was just funny or you just look at those moments as being special. So yeah, man, that's in a nutshell all the news dump of the week, just brought to you this week by Kyle and Kyle again. So
rebranding the show, the News Dump Sports Show.
The News Dump Sports Show. Yeah, that'll be our every time we hit one of the 10s. So 20, 30, 40, that'll be our News Dump episode. But again, from the Raptors to the WNBA to Peter DeBoer to Dave Smart to Bob Cole's legacy, I mean, a lot of traction on today's show, and again, a lot of good stuff. So golf clap for us for getting all that information in there in a timely fashion. So until next week, my friend, we'll bid you adieu.
Yeah, can't wait to replace your Terrence Ross jersey with a Bronny James jersey when he gets selected 19th overall.
It's gonna be a collector's item, Kyle.